Hello and welcome to an all-new adult erotica in comics. You're watching SVon82. I am Scotty, your underground comic-loving friend. You can call me whatever you'd like, just please hit that like button on your way in. Today, we're taking a little bit of a departure from the underground comics, but I promise you it's going to be worth it. We got a great story for you today, so stick around. This week's video is going to be about a more modern comic book, but I promise it's going to be a very interesting story. The name of the series is called Ant, and it's by creator Mario Gully. Mario Gully is a fantastic artist, and his story is nothing short of crazy. I promise we'll get back to the underground comics next week, but I thought that this would be a cool little departure and a little bit of a different story. Got to mix it up sometimes. Though Mario is not an erotic artist by definition, Ant is one of the more sexy characters in modern-day indie comics and deserves to be talked about. Ant is a comic book series created by Mario Gully. It's centered around a superhero character that takes place in young 8-year-old Hannah Washington's mind. She writes about her in a journal. When turning into the Ant, Hannah, as an older character, dons a skin-tight red costume with antennas. The skin acts as a body armor and the antenna as a whip of sorts. Like Spider-Man, she can scale walls with the ability to stick to surfaces. She also has enhanced speed, strength, reflexes, and agility. Her antennas also further enhance her senses. Now, later on in the story, it will get retconned as it will no longer take place in young Hannah Washington's mind. But we'll talk more about that as the video goes on. The comic was first published by Arcana Studios in February of 2004, but was initially created in 1996 while Mario Gully was serving time in prison. Volume 2 would be printed by Image Comics, and during this time had a particular issue that became infamous for a scene where a stripper removes her underwear, exposing herself. Mario would later apologize for this scene. Volume 3 was published on Big City Comics in 2008. Then in 2012, Mario sold Ant to Image co-founder and creator of Savage Dragon, Mr. Eric Larsen. Larsen would then complete the unfinished Image Volume 2 run with issue 12, and then relaunch Ant in 2021 for a 6-issue series, and started as an 8-year-old child in Volume 1, but would be featured as an adult in later issues. But the real story here is about Mario Gully and how it was created. We are going to talk all about how Ant was created, as well as why Mario sold Ant to Eric Larsen. It's a crazy story from a gifted artist, but I felt like the story had to be covered. It was just pretty inspiring and crazy at the same time. Now, we'll talk more about the Ant series as we go on throughout Mario's story, but we definitely got to dive into his story because it's a crazy one. Born in 1973 in Indiana, Mario was one of many siblings. He was really into martial arts, comics, cartoons, and art. He came from a creative family where his mother was an artist, and he had 6 other siblings, I believe. He had a couple of brothers, and he and his brothers would watch the popular shows of the time, which included Speed Racer, Mighty Mouse, $6 Million Man, and other shows. And they would draw the characters, cut them out, and play with them. They would have competitions to make the better figures and vehicles with creativity. He credits his mother in teaching him how to draw the female figure and giving him his chops. His parents would always do what they had to do to make sure that he and his brothers had comics to inspire their creativity. And he and his brother would continue as they grew up, trying to outdo each other's creations. Now, when Mario was 19, he would get himself in a little bit of trouble as he was convicted of armed robbery and was sentenced to prison. This was a seriously depressing time for Mario. He was alone. He was upset. He felt lost, but decided he would do anything he could do to better himself in all areas of life, including his art. Around that time is when he would find his ultimate inspiration in an ant. A single ant would crawl into his jail cell, and he took notice. He took notice of its freedom, of the fact that the ant had more than he did due to his horrible mistakes in life. That would inspire the character Ant. He would practice his skills drawing sexy ladies on envelopes for other inmates in exchange for commissary. He would create his own homemade comic, and it was a hit among the other prisoners. It was 24 pages and was really an incredible feat for someone behind bars. He had proven to himself and others that he had a gift, and he would set out to get his book published. He began when he was released in 1996, and at the time only to be rejected time and time again. Years go by, and in this time he had worked a regular day job and saved some money for himself, but most of all his wife and kids. They were living at his father's house, and Gully kept pushing and kept trying to do what he could to improve his art packets and make the book look better. It ended up being 6.5 years before he finally got approached with a vague offer to do some work by Todd McFarlane. Some designs for a toy line, but this kind of frizzled out as McFarlane was more focused at the time on the toys rather than the comic books. He was doing small jobs here and there, but still struggling, and this was putting a lot of strain on him and his family. A friend finally came forward and helped him out with a generous amount of money, in which he used to upgrade his portfolio, and he commissioned a cover for Mr. J. Scott Campbell for Ant. He would still continue to be rejected, though, by everyone, and he was frustrated. He began thinking of ways to possibly self-publish the book when he got an email that would change his life forever. Arcana, which was Canada's largest comic publisher, offered Gully a generous offer and a 5-year contract. O'Reilly from Arcana and Gully developed a good relationship, and things were looking up. But as time would go on, writing would become an issue on the title, and Gully just couldn't see eye to eye with some of the writers on board. Mario has an incredible talent, but seemed to have problems collabing with people. Things would go pretty well overall for the series, and Gully began to talk with Eric Larsen from Image Comics. It wasn't long after that Mario would move the Ant series over to Image Comics, despite everything that Arcana had done for him. This was a dream come true for Mario, and he wanted to run for it. So he took Ant and moved it over to Image, and this was something that he always dreamed of since Image Comics had been founded. So this was a dream come true for the guy. But while this seemed like a dream come true, time would tell this to be a disastrous decision for Mario and for Ant as well. While Larsen had been a huge fan of this title, he ultimately felt like because the character was made up in a girl's mind, that she ultimately didn't face any real consequences. By this time in 2006, Larsen was running Image and would be able to promote the series in ways that Arcana couldn't. Image would have Gully slightly change the story, with Hannah now aged several decades and actually really becomes the character. The danger and the stakes were now all real. But now the very thing that made this book unique, being Hannah in the journal and Ant existing in her mind, was taken away. It was now like every other superhero title out there on the shelves. But sales were great. It was outselling every other book at the time and was on number 2 the week of its release, right behind Superman. And by tampering with the formula, sales began to dip after a few issues, and sales dropped to less than half of what they had been. By this time, in 2005, he was nearing the end of a long marriage, and his life felt like it was falling apart. He tried to stay on the straight and narrow, but trouble was looming ahead for Mr. Gully. With his success, he began surrounding himself with an entourage. He capped his teeth with gold and diamonds, and some of these people around him were not the best crowd. He began missing some deadlines, and his work was slipping. After less than a year with Image, Ant would be the center of some controversy. Ant was seen as overly sexual, too demeaning or misogynistic. The second volume would feature Hannah Washington in very revealing clothing, really hypersexualized. She was also added to the much larger Image universe, along the likes of Spawn and Savage Dragon. Yes, he missed deadlines. Yes, he was not getting the sales that the series was getting initially, but he was working alongside lifelong heroes at Image, and he had steady work. And from Arcana, the artwork on Ant had dramatically improved, but he would get into a little trouble on issue 8 of his Volume 2 Image series. It shows a scene at a strip club and includes some partial nudity. It's nothing that's really graphic, and they seemingly done more revealing things in the series before, but he also did not include an adult label on the front of the comic, and the language in this comic was off the charts. Many F-bombs were dropped in this book, and just the cussing was out of control, and kids would grab this off the shelves. Retailers were not pleased, and the book was deemed pornographic going forward. As more retailers became angry, the flood of negative media coverage came flooding in. But Mario actually took responsibility for his actions. He released a public apology and owned up to what he did, admitting the profanity and nudity was unnecessary, and he took on the blame and promised to do better going forward. He figured out what needed to be done, and he fixed it. In 2006, Gully was doing work with the legendary Roy Thomas at Marvel Comics, his first ever project for the Big Two. It was for a book adaptation for Treasure Island. Now, his artwork was fantastic on this. However, it did not go over well with the public, and around that time, his marriage of 14 years would begin to fall apart. Marvel would also distance themselves from Mario over the whole issue 8 thing on ants. He had tried everything he could to stay on the straight and narrow path in life, but despite this, his marriage would come to an end. When this happened, he chose to flee his life. He would choose to relocate with his 4 kids to Vegas. He had met another woman out there, and he and another family member got the kids, and they decided to head out to a new life. On the way to this new start in life, he swerved to miss a semi-truck. He hit a patch of black ice and flipped his Mercedes-Benz, rolling it a few times and totaling it. Thankfully, everyone survived, but this, of course, added to his struggles. His relationship with Image had begun to sour. Things were not going well. They stopped publishing Ant 3 issues after the issue 8 incident. He was so upset, and for a period he would stop drawing, but pulled it back together for a project he would call Ant Unleashed. This was a totally adult take on Ant and was published on Big City Comics. Now, Mario was broke. He really needed the money, and it was going to be a 6-issue series, but only 3 were actually released, leaving it on an unfinished cliffhanger. Ant was featured in another series on Big City titled Omega 1 as well. By this time, the comic world had distanced themselves from Mario Gully. He had gotten a lot of bad advice from bad people around him. Not even the adult comic industry wanted any part of him. He felt overwhelmed, and he felt like Image really did not have his back when it came down to it. He didn't know what direction life was going to take him in, but all of a sudden, Marvel had some work for him again. They had a Hulk story for him in a book titled Kidnapped in 2009. But after that, his work with Marvel once again would dry up. All the work would dry up, and once again, he was struggling. The woman that he had developed a relationship with in Vegas, that went horribly bad. That became a bad situation, and things were looking bleak for him once again. He hadn't worked professionally in a little while now, and he was just so burnt out with rejection from the industry. Because of this, he ended up making some bad decisions. He turned back to some old habits for some quick and easy money. And before we know it, in 2012, Mario Gully was arrested and pled guilty to armed robbery once again after all these years of trying to walk the straight and narrow path. A failed opportunity to turn his life around with an amazing creator-owned property. When the judge found out Mario was a comic book artist, however, he let him off on just probation rather than have him serve prison time. Turns out the judge's niece and nephews were longtime comic book fans, so he got lucky on that one. And just as news was spread about Mario's release from prison, even more bigger news would surface. Desperate for money, Mario had sold the rights to Ant to none other than Eric Larsen from Image Comics, the same guy that he felt turned his back on him after that issue 8 scandal. But Larsen promised to bring the series back, as well as bring Mario back on for art duties. After all, Mario did have a small group of dedicated followers who wanted to see this happen, myself included. Larsen was going to do the writing, so it was all set up, and after 3 years, all he had to do was do his part and draw. So Larsen sends the script over along with some rough thumbnails, and Gully does his part, only not exactly how Larsen wanted it. And the disagreements just kind of start from there. Gully wanted something in a panel that was too sexual. Larsen wasn't going to use it. They both wrote about it publicly, but Gully went on social media and absolutely ripped Eric Larsen apart. It was pretty brutal. Ant was Mario's baby, and he was protective over it. But Larsen had an idea in mind, and it was going to be his way. It came out later that Ant being sold to Eric Larsen was at the insistence of Mario to fund the trip to Vegas that went awry. But regardless of what Mario felt or thought, he sold his creation to Image. It wasn't his to take liberties with anymore, unfortunately, and whatever Larsen wanted to do from there was his call. After all of this, it was Larsen's decision to move forward with Ant without Mario's involvement. Larsen finished it with himself on the art. Mario would go back to the drawing board and try to do several other projects. He tried to get a project named Bug off the ground. It wasn't successful. He funded a sketchbook, but apparently a lot of people did not receive their sketchbook, and that didn't go so well. He started an OMG art studios, but as far as I know, it dissolved during COVID. And I don't know what Mario Gully is up to this day. Hopefully he's out there creating art, bettering himself, getting back on track. I hope to see him back creating art one day. He's got an amazing story. He's one of those people who just is super resilient and just can bounce back and keep going. He has the passion and the want to continue going when he really wants to. And I hope to see him bounce back another time, personally, myself. I'm a huge fan of Ant. I have most of the series here. I don't have the Arcana Studios, the very first one, but these are the other 3-issue ones. I have a lot of the other filler issues as well. Fantastic series, fantastic cover, and you all are fantastic for coming back to watch my video again this week. Thank you all so much for the support. I really appreciate you. I drop a new video every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I hope you all have a fantastic week, and I will see you all next week. Peace.